Hi there, my name is David Batsoffen and I host a travel blog called Travel and Things. And today I am in conversation with Johannesburg tour guide Gerald Garner. Gerald, how are you doing?
Hello, David. I'm doing well, thank you. Lovely to talk to you.
It's good to talk to you. It has been a while.
It's been a long year, wasn't it?
It
Lockdowns, everything.
it has been. Before we get on to what it is that you do, tell us a little bit about how the year has been for you, specifically being in lockdown.
Well, David, I guess it's like been for everyone else. Slightly frustrating, slightly relieving to be at home for most of the time, but of course, being in the hospitality and tourism industry, really frightening. Not being able to operate and trying to find means to survive. So, yeah, we've been hustling in every possible way to keep the business alive and to at least give our staff opportunity to exist, but it's not been easy.
Now, I know that, was it last year, you moved into the middle of Johannesburg. Are you still living in downtown Joburg?
I've been living down in Joburg for 7 years, David, in various places. At this moment, I live in Braamfontein, yes.
Okay. Because I was looking, when I first moved to Johannesburg back in 1976, I lived on the corner of Bree and Wanderer Streets in a building called Strathern Mansions. And I went
Mhm.
back to try and find it. And of course, downtown Joburg has changed quite considerably since 1976, when I lived there. And it took me 3 attempts to actually find the street corner, and I didn't recognize the building at all.
But Brie and Wanderers would be extremely busy corners. So, in
Tell
terms
me
of
about it.
noise, you wouldn't want to live there.
Not anymore. It was a glorious, glorious little studio apartment, and sort of
Lovely.
first time I'd been out of home. I left home in Port Elizabeth and had my own place, and it was glorious. It was wonderful in those days. It really and truly was. Now, your specialty is downtown Joburg, is it not, or Johannesburg
Yeah,
per se?
yeah, well, when everything we do is focus on the inner city and downtown Joburg, indeed, yes.
So talk us through. I know that behind you, on I don't know what it is, if it's a shelf or a desk or something, are two books, one yellow, one blue. Both of them are
Mhm.
written by you. Are they both about the inner city?
They're not as such. Let me just grab them. These are books I have produced about Johannesburg, so they're about Joburg, not about the inner city
Right.
as such. Although the bulk of it is actually about downtown. So this was my first book called Spaces and Places Johannesburg. Came out almost 10 years ago, so by now very outdated in terms of information. And then this one was Joburg Places, which is a follow-up. It came out at the end of 2012. So once again, 8 years ago. Those are guidebooks to the city. It does cover downtown Joburg extensively, but from those books, actually, people started asking me to show them what I wrote about. And so over time, what was first a book became a walking to a company. And but today we would never be able to count accurately exactly, but our guesstimate is we've taken about 45,000 people on walking tours of the inner city.
Wow. And what are some of the interesting spaces and places that you personally have discovered while doing this or researching the books for that matter?
I mean, David, I think the thing is that Joburg is such a fluid city. It's changing all the time. So to ask that question today, the answer will be different than a week ago, and it will definitely be different than in 3 months' time,
Right.
because it's constantly in flux and everything changes. I mean, again, with the whole lockdown now, of course, so much has changed all over Joburg because many places closed down, others reopened. I mean, one of my favorite places, which has been fairly constant or consistent, not changing that much, although it is evolving as well, is what I call Little Addis. It is the Ethiopian quarter of the city. So we do a tour called Fashion District of Little Addis, and that's just a wonderful section of the city, which is really a migrant community of Ethiopian-owned businesses with great food and coffee shops and fantastic places to hang out.
The Ethiopian food, if you've never eaten it before, is quite an interesting exercise because there is that bread, um, almost like a bread that they put on the plate, and then you use that, you break that off to eat your meal with, rather than using utensils. And the first time I came across that, I thought it was a doily. I didn't want to eat it. I thought it was decoration, until I realized
It
that
actually,
everybody else was eating it, and I felt rather strange.
it does look like a doily at the bottom of the plate almost. It's called injera.
That's it.
Yeah, and it's lovely bread. And yeah, I mean, it's mezzo style food like you get all in North Africa and the Mediterranean, shared food. Um, and yeah, I mean, you make injera with either tough flour or teff flour, I mean, or rice flours. You get a brown one and a white one. But yeah, I mean, it's really lovely cuisine once you know it. But if you don't
Yeah.
know it, you may find it puzzling.
And I suppose I have to ask you about the safety aspect, because I'm sure that that was a concern for both locals and internationals when they were able to walk with you pre-lockdown. And how have you dealt with that?
David, I mean, that's an interesting question. It's always far bigger issue of locals than of foreign guests. Is locals that make people so afraid of Johannesburg and tell foreigners to be afraid. I think you are less safe parking in Parkhurst and walking to a restaurant or Melville, or actually going to Hyde Park and stopping in a corner of William Nicol and Jan Smith's Avenue, where your chances of a smash and grab are huge,
Yeah.
than actually coming in and walking to in town. So I cannot guarantee you is 100% perfectly safe. Joburg is not. We have a crime problem all over, but the problem is where the wealth is in the suburbs.
Yeah.
And if somebody is too afraid to come to town or uncomfortable to come to town, then I recommend strongly that they stay in the unsafe suburbs and deal with the consequences.
You know, the thing, that's exactly it. It's people's perceptions. If you, anywhere in the world, any minor city for that matter, as long as you're aware of your surroundings, you can deal with whatever happens to you. And people have been mugged in London, Paris, and New York constantly. So why do they then come to Johannesburg and the locals say, oh, this is the crime capital of the world? No, we can't even play cricket, let alone become a crime capital of the world, people. We don't need that title as well.
Yes, I mean, David, the fact is, I mean, people are, Joburg is not perfect and people need to be aware, and it's fair for people to wonder about
Yeah.
safety. But it is almost, if I'm allowed to say, condescending or patronizing to think that a walking tour operator is going to take you on a tour and make you unsafe.
Yeah.
So, no, yes, please don't go there on your own if you don't know the lie of the land, you don't know where to go, and you're not aware of how the city works, because honestly, you can get yourself into the wrong side of town if you don't understand how things fit together. But a walking tour operator would surely care about your safety.
Mm.
So safety is, our first concern. And yeah, we know the city intimately and we do know how to look after people.
Gerald, places like the old Carlton Centre, are they still accessible? The hotel specifically, is that accessible to people who want to go and see because I know the hotel was mothballed, and I believe the doors were just sort of nailed shut, and everything inside is still as it was on the day it closed, almost.
David, I mean, there's more legends than truth, about places like the Carlton Hotel and the Joburg Sun. So the Carlton Hotel is completely empty. There's nothing inside. It's not like it was the day it closed. It was
Okay.
basically emptied out. It is locked up and mothballed since 1997. So you cannot gain access at all. It belongs to Transnet, which is a government parastatal. And there's very little hope of it ever being renovated while it is in the hands of a state-owned enterprise who has no interest in tourism or hospitality. So no, it is sadly standing locked
Yeah.
up as a forgotten part of the city.
So I suppose those of us who lived here in the 70s and before 97 will remember. I mean, myself and a then girlfriend went to celebrate the Carlton's 21st birthday. They offered rates from when they first opened, which was for nothing, but we couldn't afford the food. So we spent the night at the Carlton, but we took our own food and a kettle so we coffee
That
and
sounds
have a meal. But at least we were there to celebrate their 21st, if not in their style, because if you remember correctly, what was it, the Three Ships, that was the restaurant to go to in Johannesburg back in the day.
yes, absolutely. I mean, how clever to take your own food along. I mean, what I wanted to mention to you is interesting. Recently, I met with who was one of the managers of the Joburg Sun. You know, the other big 5-star hotel
Mm.
of the early 80s. You know, and we actually went for the guest book of the hotel, and it was fascinating to see the kind of people who stayed there. For instance. Um, this was 1972. So the
Mm.
Joburg Sun already existed then as Tolman Towers. Later, the big,
That's right.
you know, the more modern building was built. But 72, Louis Armstrong, Apollo 11, signed
Wow, that's quite something. Seems that we've lost Gerald momentarily. I'm sure that he will come back to us in a minute or two. Oh, Gerald's gone into lockdown mode down in Bromfontein. I'll just keep talking while. Oh, there you go. You're back. Great. For a moment, you'd frozen,
yes.
but I'm used to doing this from my radio days. I'll keep talking until you come back, which you have, which is yay. Um, you were talking, Tom. You were talking Louis Neil Armstrong. You mean from Apollo 11?
Yes,
Not
yes,
Louis
yes,
Armstrong.
yes.
Louis Armstrong played a
Did I say
trumpet.
Louis?
Yeah.
Neil, indeed.
When
Yes.
you said Louis and Apollo 11, I thought, hang on a second, which one was it? But by the same, you say Neil Armstrong. I was at the Carlton Center one day, and I bumped into Charlton Heston, who had come out for a tennis tournament. And he was
Ah,
waiting for his transport. And I walked up to him and I said, Mr. Heston, I had my camera gear with me. I was busy doing some photography. And I said, would you mind if I took a photograph? And he said, yes, but I don't have time to wait. So just take the pictures while I'm busy doing whatever it is that he was doing. And I got about a half a dozen pictures, thanked him, and moved on. But thems were the days, as they used to say,
mhm.
Gerald. If you think back to the Carlton Sky Rink, which is now also the place of horror movies, I think.
Well, I mean, it's now movie production studio. So, yes.
And then I heard rumor, and I think you might have been involved in the discovery of the tunnels that run to the Johannesburg station. Is it from the Joburg post office that there were tunnels that?
No, David, I mean, these are just so many legends running around that people always
Okay,
want to know about. I had nothing to do with that. So many times people ask me if I was involved in that. I was not involved at all.
okay,
Never seen it. I
okay.
do know that they exist. It's not a discovery. It's been known for 100 years that
Mm,
they exist.
yeah,
But yes, there are tunnels from Park Station to the old post offices, which would be Russick Street Post Office or JP Post
mm,
Office, that were used for postal distribution. And then there were some others that actually led to the police stations, like what we used to be Marshall Square Police Station
okay.
and Constitution Hill. So I do believe that a few years ago, the JDA discovered them. Of course, they were not discovered. Everybody knew they
Yeah.
existed, but tried to make something out of them. However, nothing has come from it. So, I mean,
Ah.
that story has died. I have been in one of the tunnels once in my life, long before the so-called discovery was, mentioned. From the old Park Station, you can actually walk into some of them. But I mean,
Okay.
they are flooded, they are full of dirt, they are dark, they're completely unsafe. So I don't see how it would ever be possible to make them accessible to the
You're right.
public, to be honest.
Um,
Yes.
the the old Russick Street post office, has the renovation did the renovation ever start? It's a long time since I've been down to that area of town, part of the old post office, city hall, that area.
Yes. I mean, David, again, I try to avoid bureaucracy and public service. as far as it goes. So every question you've asked so far is related to involvement of public service, interesting enough, which which is an interesting thing to realize, because, where people get frustrated, or where I get frustrated with urban regeneration, is where the public service gets involved, because they're normally the biggest hindering block.
Yeah.
And there are many, like the Carlton Hotel, that's standing empty just because it belongs to a state enterprise. And it's the same with the Russick Street Post Office, which belongs to the city council. And I mean, it must be a decade almost already. The city council wanted to demolish it after the fire, because they said it was unsafe. And then there was a court case, and they were told by the court they had to renovate it because it has heritage, value. Long story short, 3 different mayors, which would be Masondo, Parkstown, and Herman Mashaba, 3 different city councils, have all each year allocated a little bit in their budgets to renovate, so that it can't be shown not to renovate. But in no ever case does it seem has it been enough to make any meaningful difference.
Yeah.
So yes, there's scaffolding on the building, and in the last year and a half, some work was done there. Some parts it looks better, but at the moment it's standing still again. I guess it now waits for the next year's budget, and then a little bit of paint will be added again.
Well, listen, if you think about it, if you go to where Gauteng tourism is, that building is unsafe. I've been in there only once. I couldn't wait to rush out of it. Cracks in the floor. The one that's near the Carlton Centre. There's a building down there that's
the old IBM.
I don't know who it used to belong to, but it's considering that it's a focal point of tourism, you'd think that they would have done it up just a little bit rather than wires hanging from open ceilings and that type of stuff.
I mean, I'm not exactly sure.
Rather walk up the 12 flights of stairs than take the elevator, because I'm uncertain if it works properly or not. But let's get away from bureaucracy. Let's hope my next question doesn't involve bureaucracy. Tell me about a typical Gerald Garner tour. No, hang on a second. Let me rephrase that, Gerald. Are you able to go on the tours again? Let's start from there. Are you able to take people out and about once more?
Yes, David, we've been doing tours at Joburg places since level 3 of lockdown, actually. Obviously started off a very small private tours so that people don't even, interact or mingle with others. But now by level 1, we do have a normal public tour scheduled for Saturdays. So we do private tours during the week. So yes, we do tour the entire city. I don't do most of the tours. Our chief storyteller and guide is Charlie Moyo. So he handles almost all the tours. But yes, we are out there all the time at the moment.
Okay. So tell me about the tours that you have, what they involve, and more specifically, seeing their walking tours, how fit do the people have to be to participate?
Well, I mean, David, is a good question. We are luckily not an adventures company, and we don't take people on runs or cycles of the city. So ours are leisurely walks.
Good.
Slow, enjoying the scenery, taking in where you are and interacting with the city and its people. We make sure there's times to sit down for coffee or things like that. So you don't have to be super fit. You definitely have to be able to move around, bearing in mind that the sidewalks are uneven. There are sometimes missing manhole covers and so on. So you must at least be agile and be able to, walk around, but it's definitely not a strenuous exercise as such. Length of tours differ depending on the route. So, I mean, they would be, our standard tour is about 3.5 hours, and that would involve about 2 to 3 kilometers, depending on the route. Some may be longer. It just depends. We have so many tours. So if you ask me to mention a few, I've already mentioned Fashion District and Little Addis. We also have what we call the East Town tour that takes in the new Jewel City and Towers Main and Absa and Maboneng, or our quintessential Joburg places tour that we started out with is the Marshalltown tour, which takes in the historic, the mining district. in the western side of the CBD where everything started. And then just for interest sake, we don't only have walking tours. We do have a few speciality tours that we offer on Saturdays. Occasionally, for instance, I think the most exciting tour we offer of all of them is the one that we call Charlie and Gerald's favorite secret Joburg places. So that's literally taking people to the places we personally like to hang out in rather than, the tourist attractions or the historic significant places as such,
Okay, so with my bureaucratic questions, that's exactly what I was trying to get to. Where are Charlie and Gerald's favorite places? And how did you find them?
Well, David, again, is never the same because it changes all the time. And what is our favorite place this month? By next month, there might be something else that we found that's even more exciting.
You're fickle, the two of you, Gerald.
So it's like Joburg. I mean, think of what do you call it? What's that shopping centre in Sandton? Village Walk. Remember, it was actually quite pretty.
Yeah,
and it's gone. Gone. Pineapple. There's some pineapple standing there now called a mark. That's just how Joburg is,
Well, you called your one book Spaces and Places. Well, now where there were places, there are now spaces, and where there were spaces, there are now places. So it's exactly what you're alluding to.
But to answer your question, so on that Charlie and Gerald's favorite Joburg places tours, we obviously start out at our own venue called the Thunder Walker, which is a historic bank building next to Gandhi Square, where we operate a restaurant and events venue, and we also have an underground bar there.
Right.
And then from there, we actually travel to Newtown. We visit a really beautiful brewery called First 15, a craft brewery owned by Pumlani in Langan, Hotso, and they do really amazing work there. And then from there, we would hop to Newtown Corner, which is just around the corner from the brewery, which is a really wonderful little old garage and panel beater site that's been renovated into a little creative hub with fashion stores and eateries. There's a beautiful sushi restaurant and things like that. And then we actually take you into the heart of the migrant city, because Joburg is a city of migrants, and that's what makes it so exciting. So we do take you to Netsanet, which is an Ethiopian restaurant and coffee shop in the Medical Arts Center. And we visit various of the shops and buildings there and just give people a glimpse of how migration has always been the thing that sustained Johannesburg since the beginning. And then from there, we actually hop to Mameneng, and we visit Bertrand's, a French Congolese cafe, which again talks about migration, and a beautiful place to sit on the sidewalk and just watch the theater of the city, taking place in front of you. And from then, we would hop to a rooftop nearby, depending on the day of what is available in terms of bookings. We could either go to Hallmark House, which has the most incredible skyline view, or any one of several other rooftops. And then we would actually end back at a Thunder Walker with dinner and drinks in the underground. That's how the tour normally goes, but sometimes we decide there's something new and wonderful that needs to be seen, and then we adapt it slightly.
Talking about skyline views, is Top of the Carlton still open? Can you get up there for that view?
David, tragically so, no. It was open all the years until before lockdown, but with Transnet actually owning that building and now having moved their own offices out of the building to Waterfall, most of the Carlton Centre is actually vacant, except the shopping centre, which is still very full and busy. But unfortunately, the lifts no longer work and there's nobody on site to maintain them. So not a single tourist can go to the top of Africa any longer.
It's a pity, because the views from that from the top were spectacular. But I'm glad that the stores are still open. I had a friend many years ago. There was, I think, Garlics or Greatermans or one of those stores had a glassware section in the Carlton Centre. And this particular man, who will remain nameless in case he watches this, had 2 Salukis, dogs. And he'd walk into the glassware section and he'd say, "Look, I'm just looking for a gift for a friend. he'd say this to one of the staff, would you mind holding my dogs while I walk around? And they'd go, no, not a problem. And then he'd bugger off and go and have coffee somewhere for about an hour. Come back.
Wow.
People are tearing their hair out because they've got no ID on him. They're stuck with dogs in a China shop. He was banned eventually. They said,
That
no,
is
you
actually quite
can't.
hilarious.
Yeah. And that wasn't a legend. True story. Going forward now, Gerald, firstly, have you seen a change in inner city Johannesburg with the lockdown? Are there less people around? Have stores opened and closed? Old ones left, new ones moved in. What does the city look like?
David, it's such a complicated question to answer because there are so
What
many
am I
things
doing with you
involved.
today? I asked bureaucratic, I asked complicated.
No.
Would you like to split that into A, B, C, or D? Would you like to make it a multiple choice question?
No, it's a very relevant question, but the background, the answer is a little bit complicated, to put it like that. Let me just first say I have actually written a book during lockdown, which is available as an ebook at the moment. It will be published in print by December. Okay. And it's called Johannesburg 2020 and Ahead. So it actually looks at the future of the inner city.
Right.
And it asks what is going to happen to Johannesburg in a post-COVID world, which is sort of what your question alludes to as well. Now, I won't talk about the book now because that will take the whole day. But just suffice to say that, we're going to see huge changes in our society in the coming years.
Talking about changes in society, it seems as COVID-19 has brought Gerald to a grinding halt once more. So much for technology and the miracle of Zoom chats. But as Gerald, you're back.
Sorry, I think my phone was ringing. That's also my connection.
That's normally what happens. That's what it is. Yes. Miracle of modern technology. It cuts into everything. All right, you were saying, Gerald, about A, about the new book, and B, about post-COVID and what changes people might discover in downtown Johannesburg.
Yeah. So, what I wanted to say is, what we're going to see is the death of the big corporate office. People are going to work remotely, and never are you going to have 10,000 people in one office building again? It's just not necessary. Yeah. And that will also have a huge impact on traffic because less people will actually commute to the office. And then the other big change you'll see in our society is a change towards urban neighborhood living and actually converting lots of these vacant spaces into housing.
Right.
Now, this has been happening in Johannesburg in the last decade anyway. In the last 10 years, over 100,000 apartments were created in downtown Johannesburg out of old office and industrial buildings. I believe that post-COVID, we're going to see much more of that, not only in downtown, but in places like Sandton and Rosebank, where you're going to see vacant office buildings everywhere, So bottom line is our society is changing, our city will change a lot. In the case of Joburg inner city, we've been through almost 2 decades of regeneration attempts, and lots of new things have opened and lots of wonderful work was done. Unfortunately, the last 3 years prior to December 2019, the regeneration dream died and collapsed because of mismanagement by the then Mayor Herman Mashaba and the political party. The DA with support of the EFF, who was supposedly in control in our city, but actually failed to maintain and manage the inner city. So hugely negative changes in the city in 2019, which culminated in xenophobia in September, October 2019, and caused many businesses in downtown Joburg to leave, to close down and go bankrupt. So there was huge changes before lockdown, negative changes as such. By 2020, things started improving. We had a change in municipal government. We had a new mayor. It seemed like the old policies like let's clean public space and then the private sector will do the rest was back on the table. Things started looking better in the inner city indeed. But of course, the pandemic hit us and everything closed down. Now, what is interesting, I was in town once or twice during the hard lockdowns. And it was the most amazing thing in the world to be in the middle of a wide street, walking, and not a single motor car in
Yeah.
place.
It's
And
it's
then you
like
real
it's almost like a dystopian world where everybody has vanished off the planet, and it's just you
yes,
in an empty Johannesburg.
exactly. But what made it more startling is it's not as if it was empty, there would be people, walking to a shop
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
something, but there would be no cars, just not a single car. And then you realize how it is cars that kill our city because cars take up every possible space
Yeah,
and make it horrible to move around because, it's just traffic. And without traffic, Joburg is the most beautiful, incredible city in the world.
yeah.
And that is interesting because my hope is that we will learn from this that the future of Joburg is in a pedestrian environment. If I say Joburg, I talk about the inner city.
Yeah.
If you go to a new development which opened after lockdown now, which is called Jewel City, next to Maboneng, pedestrianized Fox Street with shops and schools and housing next to a pedestrianized street, then you start seeing how incredibly wonderful Joburg can be with walkable
Yeah.
streets, trees, and interactive spaces. So that's the things that are, I think, slowly beginning to change in the city as we're taking literally the streets
Mm.
back from the cars and make them human environments where the people of the city who live and work and play there can thrive. So yes, there are new things happening in the city, and there's surprisingly many new places opening up at the moment. And to be honest, for the first time in 4 years, do I see optimism in the inner city. It's as if it's finding its groove again. It's as if people are getting excited again, and that after the most severe lockdown that almost
Mm.
wiped us out completely, which I think is quite exciting.
I think it's exciting and wonderful for so many reasons, and you've hit on two of my sort of soapbox topics at the moment. One is motor vehicles in inner cities, and I think back to when I first arrived. My first day in Johannesburg in 1976. Um, I came out of my apartment block, and I thought I need to get something to eat because I'm hungry. It was a Sunday morning, and Sundays in 1976, nothing moved. Shops weren't open. We didn't have television as yet. Um, Everything was closed. And I turned left and walked towards the Carlton Center because I could see it. It sort of stood out in the landscape, and walked for the longest time and found nothing open. Went back to my apartment, hungry, tired, disappointed, um, thinking to myself, why did I move to this terrible city? And then the following day, my car arrived. I'd trucked it up because I knew it wouldn't have driven from Port Elizabeth. And the parking garage was to the right of my building. So I turned right when I walked out. And just on the opposite corner was a fruit and veg shop, which was open 7 days a week, and Butch Berman's books, which were legend in Johannesburg. So had I turned right instead of left, I would have found all the food I wanted. I would have found wonderful books to
How
read.
ironic.
It is. And so it's what you make of the inner city. And I suppose, as you say, people are moving back into the inner city. It's become more gentrified, certain areas. Places like Maboneng have been up, they've been down. Hopefully, they're going back up again. And people will forget the corporate life. That was the other soapbox thing. I don't know why companies have to go, my building is bigger than yours. Well, I suppose I do because it's a whole corporate capitalist thing. Um, it's a perception that you need to be seen. That if you work from home, you're not a person that people want to deal with. But why do they need to put 10,000 people in a building? Um, because they can, or because they want to, or because it looks good. But all of those 10,000 people can work from home via a laptop.
I mean, David, it's such an interesting question to ponder. And I mean, I share your sentiment about the size of the building,
Yeah.
But, once you look at a city, and I mean, Joburg downtown has had this devastating waves of corporates leaving the city ever since the 80s of sanctions,
Yeah.
And there was an original wave of companies leaving because of sanctions that caused a downturn of the city. But if you really look at what went wrong with Johannesburg, and this I only started realizing now when I wrote my last book during lockdown, so much of it can be blamed on the corporates actually, because it's the corporates who, closed street blocks and built buildings over the city grid and blocked walkways where people would normally walk for their massive, towers as such. And then, what does an office building do? The only thing it does, it causes traffic.
Yeah.
You have few thousand people driving in to come and work, arriving at 8 o'clock and then leaving at 5 o'clock. The rest of the time, they're inside the building. They don't even go out to shop in the streets or eat in the restaurant or anything. They bring nothing to town other than traffic.
Yeah.
And traffic is what kills the city.
Yeah,
so
because
converting those buildings to living spaces and bringing more retail and restaurants and things to the streets, I think town will be far better off than having these corporates hogging the space.
Could you imagine, Gerald, buying the top of the Carlton, to buy that view, if Transnet would sell it and turning that into an apartment? Could you imagine what that would be like? It would be stunning.
It would be stunning, but the good news is there are places where you can experience that.
Yes.
So, for instance, go to Towers Main, which is an ABSA campus. So it's like 100 meters from the Carlton Center. And the old ABSA Towers, which originally was the United Towers, that's the 30-something story building. And that has just been converted into really beautiful apartments. So you can stay on the 30th floor and have that view. And it's frustrating that other buildings, still stand empty when the same could be done. Yes.
The other thing that I want to touch on before saying thank you for joining me today is the Muti markets. Are those covered on any of your tours? I've been to the one at the bottom end of Elof Street, and it's an interesting and terrifying experience for a variety of different reasons, specifically for a white person. And I think I have to stress that, because for me, it's not something that I've ever been exposed to. And at the end of the day, it's not something that I was, there were things that I saw that I wasn't expecting, things that I saw that I was expecting that made me very sad. But then you have to look at it from perhaps a cultural rather than an economic point of view, or maybe cultural rather than a Western capitalist point of view.
David, we don't cover any of the Muti markets on any of our standard tours, to be honest. It is something we can take people to if they're interested in a private tour, and we can put together a private tour on almost any topic, in the cities that is possible. We used to visit Faraday when we were still located at 1 Elof at our previous location, because it was right next door. And therefore, it just made sense to walk through there. But yes, there's also, this Faraday, which is a really interesting traditional market that talks about, centuries, if not thousands of years of traditional African medicine, harvested in a sustainable way. And I think there's a lot to learn from there. And then the other one that people would know about is KwaMama, which is, Mama is next to Mabeneng, really, which interesting, KwaMama has developed a whole new culture during lockdown, after lockdown, where you'll find it's on Sunday being the street food hub of the city now. So a lot of the people who, I guess, worked in restaurants and or had their own little eateries and, food stalls, and or more formal businesses who maybe don't have them any longer, has come together and turned KwaMama into a real proper African street food market. So you can think of the, fancy markets where the Lanis from the suburbs hang out in town. And then you can just think about something that's a little bit more real, but it seems to be very popular, to be honest.
There's something very special about street food, and I know when we've done over international tours or tours that have taken us north of the Limpopo River, my wife and I love enjoying street food, and we'll eat what the locals eat. We'll sit down and we'll look at what's being eaten left and right of us. And if the people haven't fallen off their chairs frothing at the mouth, we'll take a stab at it. What's the worst that can happen is you don't like it. That's all.
That's such a good point. But David, that's actually, sometimes I get so excited about this, but I also get so frustrated about this because, Johannesburg as a city is so misunderstood by so many people. That's actually great for tourism business, by the way, because it means you can address that, and overcome those perceptions, But I mean, the one thing that Joburg has going for it that we as a city just don't make enough of is our food, our cuisine. People would actually travel to the Western Cape with their idea that they're going on a cuisine experience. And yes, you can eat in fancy restaurants, 5-star fine dining food in several places. It's amazing. But to be honest, if you eat out a lot, it gets boring very quickly. It's the same experience everywhere. Whereas you can come to downtown Johannesburg, you can walk the streets of the inner city, and you can actually eat food from more than 50 African countries.
Yeah, that's what it's all about.
There's no other city in the world that offers that. There's a Pan-African food festival that's never stopping. It's always ongoing. And then add to that our great local foods. I mean, add South African food from its Cape Malay infusions to all the local, Black traditional foods of South Africa. Then add Italian and everything else that came here, Greek food, whatever, through migration. And you have the most incredible diversity of food.
Yeah.
And I just sometimes wish our authorities were allowed to talk about the bureaucracy, and our city councils and things would encourage it more. Because that is what makes Joburg unique, and that should also put us on a map as the one city in the world that people should travel to.
I hear what you're saying. Gerald, before I say thank you and goodbye, how do people contact you? How do they book tours? Is there a website? Is there a phone number?
Yes, no, thank you, David. So people can find us as Joburg Places. Our website is joburgplaces.com, or find us on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram as Joburg Places. You can email me as gerald@joburgplaces.com, or WhatsApp us on 082-894-5216. And
that number once again?
082-894-5216.
Great stuff. My guest today on In Conversation With has been Joburg tour operator, Gerald Garner. Gerald, thank you so much for joining me. I wish you all the best going forward. And hopefully in the not too distant future, I will join you on one of these tours.
Thank you, David. We would love to show you your own city once again.
Become a tourist in your own city. Gerald Garner, thanks for being on In Conversation With.